Throughout the 80s, glam rock was dominating the United States. For local bands and newcomers to the scene, the options were limited. Play the type of stuff that's on the radio, or doom yourself to almost certain obscurity. For one band from Texas, the choice was clear, and over the course of nearly a decade, they became one of the most in-demand party bands in the South. Yet the road to a major label release seemed unclear, and the chasm between them and the mainstream remained far too wide. How did they overcome their situation? What led them to change? And how did they end up as a colossus of the industry? In this video, we'll cover the early years of Philip Anselmo, Rex Brown, and the Ebed brothers. This is the origin story of Pantera. The story begins with Jerry Abbott, a family man from Arlington, Texas. Jerry was an accomplished country musician and had access to his own studio, in which he took care of engineering and production duties. A few of his songs would go on to hit the charts.
I want a little cowboy, and mama's gonna give me that.
Jerry and his wife had two sons, Vincent and Daryl, who, because of their father's occupation, were introduced to the world of music from a very young age. One day, Vincent began to show a more direct interest in the art.
I got a pretty unique story when it comes to what got me started on the drums. When 7th grade rolled around, my dad signed me up for a school band, and I went down and they passed out instruments to everybody at the thing, and I was one of the last guys, and they handed me a tuba and said, "Here, you're gonna be a tuba player." And I was like, hell yeah. Took it home. I'm sitting in the living room blowing on this thing at lunchtime. You know, you have to make this funny buzzing noise when you blow into it to make that big tuba sound. And my dad comes running out of his bedroom in his underwear, and he's like, "What the hell is going on in here?" And I said, "Dude, I'm gonna be a tuba player. Check it out." And he's like, "No, you're not, son." And he went straight to his room, put his clothes on, comes back, and he goes, "Get in the car with me. We're going up to see your band director. You're gonna play the drums." I was honestly heartbroken at the time, and he went up there, changed me over to the drums, and then the very next day when I started in drums, I was like, oh, thank God, man. So my dad changed the course of heavy metal.
Following in his older brother's footsteps, Daryl would begin showing an interest in the drums as well. But being unable to catch up, Daryl started searching for his own way to shine.
When we started out, man, it was the old Eddie and Alex Van Halen story. You know, we both started on drums, and I got better, and I wouldn't let him play on the drums. And so my dad went and got him this guitar, and I used to walk by his room, because our rooms were side by side, and I'd see him standing in front of the mirror with his Ace Frehley costume on, just standing there holding the guitar, and I'd just walk by and go, man, is he ever going to learn how to play that thing? You know, I didn't think he was ever getting on with it. One day he came in and said, you want to jam? You know, I kind of giggled, and I said, "You can play that?" And he goes, "Yeah, man, let's jam." So kicked in, and the first song we ever did was "Smoke on the Water." Good old Deep Purple. And you know what? We didn't play their version, and we didn't play the album version, but we played the 12-hour version of us just going over and over. And it's like, this is what we want to do forever now. This is so kick-ass.
With a little bit of parental guidance, Daryl began to discover the great potential of the electric guitar.
I'm not a heavy...
take lessons or anything?
I took like one or two from one dude and then one from one dude, and the only dude that really, I think, taught me anything was my dad. He's like a real well-rounded musician. He plays acoustic guitar real fluently, and he plays electric guitar. I mean, he plays anything from rock to country, and he's always cutting his own tunes.
Yeah.
So he plays everything on his tunes. He plays like, I come in and he's doing a keyboard part, and I go, what the fuck is he doing, you know? I mean, dude, he just blows me away. He never ever tried to cram me on one style or anything. I showed him that I learned Smoke on the Water, like on the E string, dun, 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 dun. And dude, he goes, well, dude, check this out. He goes, this is what you call a bar chord. Then I went, dun, 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 I died. I went, Jesus Christ.
Proof positive. Now look.
Oh my God.
There it is. You see any similarity in that fella and that fella?
Oh my God.
There he was, age 13, and that's the guitar.
Once the brothers discovered their instruments of choice, it was time to take the next step, forming a band with the help of some of their friends from school.
The summer of 1979 is when we first met, and then carried it on all through high school. Vince and I met in marching band, believe it or not. I was a trumpet player, and he was a drummer, and we came together and learned of each other that, you know, Terry and I were starting to look for a drummer. We didn't like our drummer. and Vince and Daryl were looking for a new bass player. And so he and I met at summer band camp. Terry and I showed up over at Vince and Daryl's house, and we started playing.
The next task was to find a good name.
The first name that me and Dime ever came up with for the band was Gemini, following in the footsteps of bands like Journey, Heart, stuff like that.
Oh, sure.
Then it elevated from Gemini to Eternity, which was much cooler. And then one day in high school, when I was in the drum line, a guy suggested to me, man, you ought to call your band Pantera. And he goes, and I said, what the hell's Pantera? He goes, oh man, it's the coolest race car there is. Started investigating and found out it meant Panther in Spanish, and really liked the way it just had a nice ring to it, and brought it to the band. I brought a logo in with a cat's head on it. It was the very first logo we ever had. Everybody loved it. And so we became Pantera from that point on, man.
It was now 1981, and the lineup was set with Vinnie Paul on drums, Daryl Abbott on lead guitar, Tommy Bradford on bass, Terry Glaze on rhythm guitar, and Donnie Hart on lead vocals. Things started moving quickly.
We had sent a demo tape to Tom Warner. I think he was with Warner Brothers at the time, and he liked it, but it came down between us and another band. We don't know for sure who it is, but that was about the time Motley Crue came around the scene. So it could have been a coincidence, or it could have been, but Tom Warner signed them. And after that, that's when I basically said, we were that close, we didn't make it, I'm going to college.
Bradford's departure opened up a slot for another young bassist, who seemed to fit right in with the rest of the band.
Vinny and I got to be really good friends in this lab band, because we were the backbone of the rhythm section. And something about the two of us playing together, we started to get the feel. We started to get that groove that I'm talking about before. At that point, I was 15 years old, Dom was 13, learning from his dad.
Following this change, Glaze would leave behind rhythm guitar duties, completely dedicating himself to vocals, which allowed Daryl, who was rapidly improving at the instrument, to take care of all guitar duties.
Dime went from just being a kid to play bar chords to this protege overnight, and it was just it was the most unreal thing I've ever seen in my life. From like some kid all of a sudden just to do that, you know, and not seeing him for a summer or two or 3 months, and then come out this completely different dude. It was amazing.
And with everything now in place, it was time to hit the studio. This video is sponsored by the small team behind this channel. Making long-form videos takes a lot of work, but we want to do more. With your help, we'll be able to hire more writers, editors, and other staff, which will help us produce more videos on the greatest bands out there. If you'd like, you can chip in via Patreon or by becoming a member right here on YouTube. The more help we get, the more videos we'll be able to make. I appreciate your support, and now back to the video. Making full use of Jerry Abbott's resources, the band quickly went to work at Pentego Sound Studios. Despite all members being very young, with Daryl and Vinny at 16 and 19 respectively, they were eager to get their name out into the world, and so in 1983, the band released its debut album, under their own label, naming both Metal Magic. While the album sold poorly, it did establish Pantera as a contender in the local scene, with their in-the-moment party songs, which blended well with some higher-profile acts.
It was just we were growing and figuring it out and playing the songs live. You know, we never wanted to be the biggest band in Arlington, Texas. We just thought, well, we want to be the next Van Halen. Nobody's going to be the next one. Why not us? We never had small visions of just being a big fish in a little pond. We wanted to be it and didn't have any reason to think we couldn't. That was the mindset, I guess.
The album's title track showcases the Abbott brothers' joint power and the already characteristic hard-edged thrashy glam sound. And on tracks like I'll Be Alright is where Daryl's ever-growing shredding prowess came into view. Despite the album's commercial performance, it proved ear-catching enough to be featured and reviewed in Metal Forces magazine, where the band's debut received praise. They are not afraid to use melody, harmonies, and keyboards, something that is missing in quite a few of the new bands, and they still have time to add stunning solos and heavy guitar work to their songs. But the review also expressed a couple of criticisms. The LP of course begins with the now almost obligatory deep voice to strike terror into your hearts. This is old hat now and should be avoided. In a brief note on the album art, which was hand-drawn by a friend of the band, one word of warning: ignore the cover and buy the record.
Big Paul from Pantera, Skin Basher, Trash! Hey, I'm Don Durlette, lead guitar. Terry Lee, lead vocals. Mom! This is Rex rocking from Pantera. If you like it hot and heavy, we got it. Come on, guys!
Eager to make a name for themselves, the group began touring extensively all around the South, playing all types of shows, from birthday parties to bar mitzvahs, and simultaneously writing new material for their next LP. By summer of 1984, the band had released a new album titled Projects in the Jungle. Along with the album, the band also released its very first music video. The group's overall sound, image, and attitude had evolved since its first release, with several magazines noting an improvement in production value across the board. Following in the footsteps of other heavy metal acts who had released seminal records during this time, the band's sound became noticeably heavier.
You know, we kind of mimicked our heroes, the people that we grew up listening to at the time, and then all of a sudden, you know, here comes this wave of metal, Slayer and Metallica, and of course we were touched by it and wanted to go in a heavier direction.
This change was particularly noticeable in the album's title track. Although their sophomore effort didn't fare much better commercially than its predecessor, the band was slowly building momentum, and people began paying more attention. Throughout all of this, Jerry Abbott's helping hand never faltered.
Because of their dad's, job there, we would just go in whenever there was an open slot, take advantage of free time in the studio, cutting songs, and then before you know it, we have enough, and hey, let's put out another record.
The new album, also released on Metal Magic Records, was again featured in Metal Forces magazine, with an overall positive review. Believe me, these Texans have all the qualities of the next American Stadia rock band. Corporate majors must get the message soon. With Daryl's playing being compared to that of his heroes, how about a potential challenger to Edward Van Halen's crown in Diamond Daryl Abbott? And their foray into new territory was also noticed. Pantera have all the youthfulness and commercial leanings of Def Leppard, while still possessing an equal amount of ball-breaking heavy metal style, a band that will keep both the hardcore element and the 16 readers happy at the same time. Now Pantera was flourishing, playing a lot of shows and living off their music, all while being hotly discussed as the next band out of Texas to be signed to a major label. And while they were honing and sharpening their skills, their showmanship had equal priority.
They had this guy named Ken Webster, who they nicknamed Pyro, and he came up with homemade pyrotechnics, came up with this homemade light system. He was a guy from the Air Force, and he kind of scrounged around the base, got these B-52 landing lights, these Bombay door lights, all these things. He rigged them up through his own digital sequencer, and so they had explosions, they had this massive light, just rivaling anything that was in an arena, and it was in these little tiny clubs. And so for a fraction of what you could get for what you'd pay to go to this arena show, you'd get the same songs, the same sort of level of professionalism.
At the time, venues tended to favor bands that played covers, especially radio hits. However, the band was set on going their own way.
We were one of the first bands in Texas at that time that were getting away with playing originals. And And the way I remember it anyway is we played 3 sets a night or more, but usually the first set we would play like what was ever popular on the radio, a little Ozzy and Kiss and whatever, and then we'd come out for a second set and do all original. We had fire and lights, and it was an awesome show. And then we'd come back on third set and play all our heavy stuff, whether it's Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, UFO, Metallica, and all that stuff.
But by the following year, things would begin to change. By 1985, the dissonance between Glaze's melodic vocals and the band's sonic evolution became more evident. It is true that they occasionally sound like Def Leppard, but that is largely due to vocalist Terry Glaze, who sounds a lot like Joe Elliott. And although the band was consistently playing jam-packed shows, there was no big record deal in sight. By late summer that year, they made their third independent release, titled I Am the Night. Along with the LP, they also released their second music video. The album's sound went into an even heavier direction, continuing the same trajectory. The overall darker tone was also expressed through the album's cover, which was a step away from their colorful catalog. The album sold pretty well for an independent release and was featured in Metal Forces with a stellar review, applauding the band's versatility. How the hell can bands like Motley Crue and Rat attain megastar status with competition like Pantera around? This has got to be Pantera's pièce de résistance. I cannot praise this LP too highly, it just destroys all other bands in the glam/commercial/heavy metal world. This band could and would take over the throne of commercial metal kings, given the right commercial backing. I'll stick my neck out and suggest that I Am the Night is the best LP of its type and genre ever recorded. Despite the high praise, in the months following the album's release, the band was unable to get that big record deal they'd been waiting for, and their expected breakout was still elusive. Although they weren't able to break out of the South, the band's music and showmanship, especially Diamond Darrell's whirlwind guitar playing, began to attract the attention of some important names.
And me and Dom were listening to freaking Kill 'Em All, the first Metallica record. Had met James and Lars. They'd been down, stayed down at the house for about 2 weeks. We just jammed nonstop. Really cool. And meeting those cats were just a totally different world for us. That was such a great experience, you know? So we needed somebody like that in the band.
By the third album, I Am the Night, Darrell had become friends with James Hetfield and Lars from Metallica. And you can just hear the influence all over the record that the band was getting heavier and heavier. So we're driving the gigs. The music in the Suburban is Metallica. We went and saw them live. Darrell used to hang out with them. And so Pantera was getting heavier and heavier. And so it was just a logical kind of a growth of the band.
And some of Pantera's style also rubbed off on Metallica.
Well, what a blessing to have been in his life and him in my life. And yeah, some of those early days, just traveling down there to the Dallas area and meeting with those guys and just hanging out. Dimebag introduced me to the solid state amp. I remember he had this freaking amazing crunch going on. It's like, what is that? You know? So, inspired each other. He inspired me as well, no doubt.
But while they were getting along great with some of their heroes, things weren't as simple internally. In 1986, a drastic change was in order.
The reason I left is because the four of us, plus Vince and Darrell's father, we all voted. And the Abbotts, the three of them, never split their vote. And so it didn't matter what I wanted to do. The Abbotts made all the decisions. And eventually I just thought, I don't like what's going on. It wasn't the 2 hours on stage. It was the other 22 hours of the day where we wanted to kill each other.
After Glaze's departure, the band would spend the rest of the year looking for a singer, doing many shows with different vocalists, with no one standing out in particular. But then, a new candidate appeared.
We hear about this guy that played in this band called Razor White. Then he gets me on the phone, and he goes, man, I just talked to some dude, and he sounds just like Bon Jovi. And I went, what does that mean? That's just the way the brothers talked, you know? That means he had mojo. So I said, all right, well, what do you want to do? I said, I'll book him a ticket, whatever, you know. I was the only guy working in the band, pretty much. So I said, look, I'll book this guy down. Let's see if he works out. We got to do something. We just can't sit here stagnant, you know. This is the breaking point.
Smell is about as wasted as Tom Landry after the 8th loss.
After a long and arduous search, a light seemed to appear at the end of the tunnel.
My first time trying out for Pantera, yeah, they flew me in. Rex picked me up in a Corvette or some shit. I was friggin' 17. We pull up to the studio and I can see him straight through the door, you know. I'd seen pictures of him on the records and stuff, you know. Or and say, what's up, bro? What's up, bro? What's up, bro? And their dad was there. Damn, the first thing he started playing, that experience right there alone, we jammed everything from old Van Halen to Iron Maiden, and it was just like, wow. I had never been in a room with that level of musician in my life.
This guy was amazing. Looked the part. He was fresh 18. That moment when you get somebody after you just jam with 5 assholes, man, you know, that feeling was really, really cool. That's when we knew, oh shit, this could be something good. He moved into the house in the bedroom right next door to me and didn't leave for 3 years. And we wrote all this incredible material.
In early 1987, Pantera had found its new lead singer in Philip Anselmo. Growing up in New Orleans, Anselmo was exposed to a wide variety of music from a young age. In my earliest childhood memories, we were living in the French Quarter. You were surrounded by street musicians and musicians in bars all night, because there's no real closing time. You hear music 24/7. The popular music of my mother's generation, hearing it with her young friends, there was no escaping the sound of the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, even the great radio bands of the day. Back in 1981, Anselmo started playing with local bands, and by 85, he joined Razor White, acting as their lead singer and guitarist. Around the same time, he dropped out of high school, later stating that he did his homework on stage. Despite his dedication to music, his tenure in the band didn't last very long. I can't say Razor White was awful, but it was too. The mentality of clubs back then catered to popular bands of the day, which were glammier. With both Pantera and Anselmo coming from the bar band glam culture, both parties encountered similar challenges. When I got to Pantera, they were going through a really gigantic rebuilding phase, you know? After Terry Glaze quit, they didn't stop. They had about 5 replacement singers, their crowd dwindled, and it was tough. In 1987, Pantera began playing shows with the new recruit, and almost immediately, something felt different.
It seemed like before that it was one big party. The energy that Dime and Vinny and Rex had, you know, after Phil had joined the band, before that, they all had it, because Terry was like that, and they were just crazy party. But when Phil came, you still had all that party going on, but you had him in front. That was stronger than all.
With the band still playing their old material, Anselmo was successfully hitting Glaze's high notes while also incorporating a growlier tone. Now, it seemed that the long-lasting search had paid off, and it was time the new Pantera reclaimed its place in the scene. And soon enough, the band went to work on their first record with the new singer. Pantera may have had a new face, but their fourth independent album, 1988's Power Metal, seemed to continue right from where they left off. Most of the material for the album was written with Terry Glaze still in the band, including the lyrics, which were rewritten later by Anselmo. The new vocalist's talents came into full view, going from lower raspy range to a much higher range. The guitar playing became even more pronounced, as can be heard on the title track. The album prompted another appearance in Metal Forces magazine after a long while, and once again received a positive review. Power metal is the band's fourth album and at times sees Pantera taking a heavier approach. However, the opening track Rock the World is pure anthemic rock, which the band delivers so superbly. New vocalist Phil Anselmo comes over sounding like a cross between Jeff Tate and Rob Halford, and puts an impressive performance throughout. And with Anselmo bringing his own temperament to the shows, they were getting progressively more crowded and wild.
We sold 46,000 copies of that record out of the backseat of our car. Unbelievable. That's how big when Philip came in and how much star talent that he had. It went from playing to 1,000 people. We were playing 3,000 seats a night. No more of this cover shit. You know, it was, when Phil first started, we would play one set of covers for 45 minutes and play a full hour-and-a-half show and then leave them with a bunch of, you know, beer drinkers and Hellraisers at the end. Those kind of tracks. Then it was officially, we were doing our own stuff, you know, but none of that old stuff with that old singer.
At this point, Pantera was ready to leave their past behind, musically and aesthetically.
You know, we were heavily influenced by bands like Judas Priest. I still wear my spikes, Kiss, Van Halen, stuff like that in the early days. So we emulated our heroes. Of course. And that's what they wore, leather and spandex and spikes and all that stuff. And
I think everybody was just tired of that glitzy LA crap. And if you take all those costumes and all that big budget production of it and go back and just listen to those songs, there's some pretty damn good songs.
Bands like Slayer and Metallica came along.
To like our playlist for anything from Merciful Fate to Faith No More to Bleach to, that's when all this crazy insane music was going on.
The image thing was no longer important, you know, and we felt the same way. We felt like it was all about the music, so we got rid of the image.
Well, Philip and the band, it just took on a whole different sound because all the influences are all melding together.
And we always felt like being from Texas. You know, we were self-influenced, you know. Cowboys. You go to LA, there's a big trendy Guns N' Roses thing going on. Everybody does it. You got to do it to fit in. New York, you know, depending on what it is, maybe Circus of Power or whatever, you know. Being in Texas, you know, is like, fuck, we do our own thing.
Suddenly, many of their old notions about the music scene were starting to dissipate. There was a lot of education between the four of us, and a lot of growing up between the four of us to even get to a point where we actually did destroy the myth of the club band. Right around this time, the band was able to mingle with many of the thrash metal bands they looked up to. Daryl's playing even grabbed the attention of one of the prime acts in the scene, and the guitarist was given an offer.
When I first heard of Daryl, when he was just newly starting Pantera, I was looking for a guitar player. This is after So Far So Good So What was released, and I needed to make a little lineup change, which I'm pretty famous for. I had called up Daryl. I just hired Nick Menza on drums, and I said, Daryl, I'd like you to play guitar for me. And he said, sure, man, but I need to bring my brother. And I said, what does your brother do? I thought he was a guitar tech or something. He said, no, he plays the drums. And I said, well, I just hired Nick Menza. And he said, you know, basically that he wasn't going to be able to do it unless his brother came along.
With Anselmo giving them an eye and ear-catching figure at the front, and the band ditching their stage get-up for their everyday street-style clothes, things were set in motion.
We were made aware that an A&R rep from Atco Records was there. And at the end of the show, it was like, okay, where is this dude? You know, You know, so sure enough, you know, he did bail. And so we were all disheartened because we had been through
lots of labels.
And they were all telling us, we don't think you. We don't think. But this guy thought, and we didn't know it at the time, but I guess about a week later at the very most, Boom, 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 boom on my apartment door. Open it up. Dimebag walks in. He goes, remember that motherfucking record label exec fucking bailed on us? And I'm like, yes, sir, I do. He goes, well, motherfucker wants to offer us a fucking record label deal. You know, so it was like, surprise.
4 guys come on stage and they start spinning their hair. Like, oh boy, what are we in for here? But then Daryl just launches into one of his riffs.
Pantera was now officially signed to Atco Records, and the only thing left to do was record their next album. Leaving the warm nest of Jerry Abbott, the band was paired with producer Terry Date, who had previously worked with Soundgarden. Finally, after everything they had gone through, Cowboys from Hell was released on July 24, 1990, exploding onto the global rock stage and simultaneously introducing a new musical direction, in tune with their new tendencies and described by fans as groove metal.
When we got signed to the coolest label by the coolest people who said, give us the heaviest, rawest Pantera live album you can make and make that motherfucker kick from start to finish, and that's what we did.
Gone were the flashy colors and shiny outfits on the album cover, and in came a dark and dusty saloon with the hellish cowboys marching through. Pantera walked through the door, and just like in the movies, everyone turned around to take a peek at the new stranger, who was somewhat familiar but changed, molded into an iconic, and at the same time iconoclastic, heavy metal star.
We got 2 really great albums. Those are the only 2 we care to talk about, and those rip, and that's power metal, and of course Cowboys from Hell. So if you find any of that old stuff, it's a collector's item and keep it in your back pocket.
Cowboys record is the product of us growing together and being Panther as it really is, you know, right. You know, aggressive, you know, growing up, you know, because we're all still real young, except for Vince and Rex.
26.
But just kidding.
The album became their breakthrough record and launched the band into worldwide metal stardom, opening up exciting new and unexplored territories. So what happened after Cowboys from Hell launched Pantera's career? Well, that's a story best left for another time, and if you'd like to hear it, then make sure to subscribe and stay updated for future videos.
Kids up and get things fired up, if you know what I'm talking about. Get you a pole. Shh, quiet. Don't wake the boys up, they're sleeping.